Chapter 1. So how did we get here? Asks. Chapter 1. So how did we get here? Asks the unknown voice. Well, it all started when the Zentharis planet was ravaged beyond repair. Their home, once a flourishing world, was now a barren wasteland. Their ecosystems destroyed, their cities in ruins. It was completely unlivable. The leader of the Zenthari, Xykaris, stood among the last of his people, gazing at the ruins of their civilization. We must move, Xykaris declared, his voice carrying the weight of desperation. We've used up all that we have left to escape, but there's nowhere left to go. We need to find a new home, one where we can rebuild. But finding a new home was no simple task. Many planets, systems, and races offered sanctuary, but none could meet the Zentharis' needs. There were 4 planets, however, that caught Xykaris' attention: Aetheris, Kronova, Zephyros, and Thalassos. Each planet had its own allure, its own strengths. But which one would welcome them? Which could be the best future for the Zenthari? Xykaris couldn't decide. The weight of the decision was too much. He needed a way to choose that would satisfy all 4 planets, a way to ensure that one planet would be the victor and that the others would be left to their own fates. And then, an idea struck him. A soccer tournament. The sport was universal across many races, and the potential wealth and power it promised would be impossible for any of the 4 planets to resist. Not only would the victor earn the Zentharis' allegiance, but there would be vast rewards in trade and influence. It would be a way to prove worth, on the field, not just in diplomatic negotiations. Thus, Xykaris called upon the 4 planets and laid out his proposal, a tournament where each would send their best squad to compete against one another, and the winning planet would be granted the privilege of taking in the Zenthari. The stakes were high, but the planets were intrigued. And so, they all agreed. Each planet gathered its squad and prepared for the grand competition. Aetheris, the planet of boundless skies. Kronova, the technological marvel. Zephyros, the desert domain of strength. And Thalassos, the aquatic paradise of unity. Chapter 2. The tournament begins. The matches were set. For match day 1, the first 2 games were Aetheris vs. Zephyros, Kronova vs. Thalassos. The first match between Aetheris and Zephyros started with high expectations. However, things quickly took a strange turn. In the opening 6 minutes, Nyra Valis, Aetheris' star forward, noticed something unsettling. The ball wasn't behaving as it should. It seemed to travel in the wrong direction, even when she made perfect passes. Suspicious, she reported it to the referee, but the game carried on, and after a short while, the strange ball movements stopped. Then, around halftime, another anomaly occurred. Zara Kin, the star midfielder for Zephyros, received the ball from defense and began her typical drive upfield. But as she approached the box, something bizarre happened. The ball simply rolled out of play, even though she hadn't touched it. The Zephyros players were confused but quickly brushed it off, focusing on the match. In the 76th minute, Zephyros pulled off a stunning but questionable victory when Talon Vrak scored a decisive goal, seemingly out of nowhere. No one quite understood how, but Zephyros had won. Meanwhile, the match between Kronova and Thalassos was equally contentious. Early on, Volt Nexus, Kronova's star player, was brutally tackled in the box, but no penalty was given. He was furious. He noticed something was wrong with the officiating, but the match continued. As the game neared its end, Corvin, Thalassos' goalkeeper, made an incredible save and launched a long pass from midfield. To everyone's shock, the ball flew through the air and inexplicably landed in the back of the net. The Thalassos players, confused but excited, rushed to celebrate. It was a win, but the strange events surrounding the match left the players unsettled. As the second round arrived, The matchups were set. Thalassos vs. Aetheris. Zephyros vs. Kronova. Both matches felt off. The referees seemed to overlook major fouls, handballs, and incidents that would normally be punished. The intensity was high, but something was amiss. In the match between Aetheris and Thalassos, the two teams exchanged goals, and Aetheris narrowly won 3-2. The referees' questionable decisions continued to cloud the match. Similarly, in the Zephyros vs Kronova game, Kronova won 1-0, but once again, the officiating felt like it was influencing the result. The teams were left with a sense that something or someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. With match day 3 set, the final battles to secure a place in the final were Thalassos vs. Zephyros. The winner goes to the final. Kronova vs. Aetheris. The winner also goes to the final. The tension was palpable. There was no doubt that something far more sinister was unfolding. Chapter 3. The Revelation and Betrayal. The final match between Thalassos and Zephyros, and Kronova and Aetheris, started with intense energy. The stakes were higher than ever. But then, in a shocking turn, everything descended into chaos. A brutal, unrelenting series of fouls took place, and before long, 22 red cards were issued, one to each player on the field. It was an unprecedented moment in the tournament's history, and the game was halted completely. The second match, between the remaining teams, experienced the exact same fate. Once again, a full 22 red cards were shown, and the game was abandoned. The tournament seemed to unravel before everyone's eyes. With all teams now on 4 points, the situation seemed impossible. But Lord Xykaris wasn't fazed. He had orchestrated the entire event from the start, pulling strings behind the scenes. He stood before the gathered representatives of the planets, a smirk creeping across his face. The winning team never mattered, Xykaris declared. This tournament was all about bribes. I already won. A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. Fear set in as the reality of his words sank in. How had they been so blind? Had it all been a game to him? Xykaris didn't wait for a response. He continued, his voice growing colder. Now, you will stay here on Zenthari. None of you are leaving until you help me fix this broken planet. Only then will you be allowed to return to your own worlds. The representatives and players from all 5 planets reluctantly accepted his claims. Despite the betrayal, they had no choice but to comply. But Xykaris had no intention of honoring his word. He manipulated the leaders and the people of the other planets, moving between Aetheris, Kronova, Zephyros, and Thalassos, sowing further discord and straining their resources. As the planets struggled to repair Zenthari, it became clear that their sacrifices were far from being reciprocated. However, among the chaos, Nyra Valis and the other players from the tournament formed a reluctant alliance. They pledged to help fix Zenthari, but they made it clear, they would only stay if Xykaris allowed them to leave once the job was done. The work was grueling. The Zenthari planet had been so severely damaged that it took years to rebuild its infrastructure, its ecosystem, and its people. But eventually, the planet began to heal, and the 5 planets managed to restore what was once lost. Once the work was complete, Xykaris, having gotten what he wanted, left without a word. He disappeared into the far reaches of space, leaving the people he had betrayed behind. But Nyra Valis and the others, hardened by the betrayal, vowed their revenge. They knew they would one day confront Lord Xykaris, and when that day came, he would answer for the damage he had done.